They found Sheriff Daniel Corbin 3 days after he went missing. He was still inside the Hollow Ridge cabin, sitting upright in a wooden chair facing the door. His service revolver was on the floor beside him. His hands were folded in his lap. And when the deputies finally broke down that door on the morning of October 14th, 1987, they said his eyes were open, wide open, like he'd been waiting for them. The coroner would later report that Daniel Corbin had been dead for at least 48 hours. But here's what they couldn't explain. The cabin door had been locked from the inside. Every window was latched shut. There were no signs of struggle, no signs of forced entry, no signs of anyone else ever being there. And Daniel Corbin, a man who'd served his county for 23 years without a single complaint, had no obvious cause of death, no wounds, no trauma, no poison in his system. Just a man who walked into an abandoned cabin in the North Carolina mountains and never walked out alive. This isn't folklore. This isn't legend passed down through whispered campfire stories. This is documented fact. And what makes it worse is that Daniel Corbin wasn't the first person to disappear near that cabin. He was just the first one with a badge. The Hollow Ridge property had been abandoned since 1952, when the last known resident, a woman named Dalton, was found dead in her bed under circumstances the county chose not to investigate too closely. After that, the land sat empty. No one bought it. No one wanted it. Local hunters avoided it. Teenagers who tried to break in for thrills said they couldn't get past the porch. They described a feeling, a pressure in their chest, a voice in their head that told them to leave. And they did, every single time. Until Daniel Corbin got a call one autumn evening from a hiker who claimed to see lights moving inside the cabin. Candlelight, the hiker said, like someone was home, and Daniel, being the kind of man who believed in duty over superstition, drove up that mountain alone to investigate. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. Daniel Corbin wasn't a reckless man. His deputies would tell you that. His wife would tell you that. He was methodical, careful, the kind of officer who checked in by radio every hour when he was working alone. But on the night of October 11th, 1987, something changed. He radioed dispatch at 6:47 in the evening to say he was heading up to Hollow Ridge to check on a disturbance report. He said he'd call back in 30 minutes. He never did. By 8 o'clock, his wife Martha had called the station asking if anyone had heard from him. By 9, 2 deputies were driving up that mountain with flashlights and growing dread. They found his patrol car parked at the end of the dirt access road, doors unlocked, keys still in the ignition. His radio was on the passenger seat. His flashlight was gone, and leading away from the car, up toward the cabin, were his footprints in the mud. Just his, no one else's. The deputies followed those prints all the way to the cabin porch, where they stopped. The door was shut. The windows were dark. And when they knocked, when they called his name, there was no answer. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels like it's listening. They didn't go inside that night. Protocol said to wait for backup for daylight, for a warrant if needed. So they secured the perimeter and waited. And while they waited, one of those deputies, a man named Carl Hewitt, later said he heard something. Not a voice, not footsteps, just a low, rhythmic sound coming from inside the cabin, like someone breathing, slow and steady, in and out. He said it went on for hours. When the sun finally came up and the sheriff's department obtained emergency entry clearance, 6 men went into that cabin together. And that's when they found Daniel, sitting in that chair, hands folded, eyes open. The room was freezing cold despite it being mid-October and nearly 70 degrees outside. There was frost on the windows, frost on the inside, and on the table beside Daniel was something no one could explain, a handwritten note, in his handwriting. It said, "I shouldn't have opened the door." The official report filed by the Watauga County Sheriff's Department listed Daniel Corbin's death as undetermined natural causes. No autopsy was performed at the family's request. The case was quietly closed within 2 weeks. But the men who were inside that cabin, the ones who carried Daniel's body out, they didn't stay quiet. Carl Hewitt left the department 6 months later and moved to Virginia. He refused to talk about what happened, even to his own family. Another deputy, Thomas Rigsby, started having nightmares. He told his wife he kept dreaming about the cabin, about walking up to that door and hearing someone on the other side whispering his name. He said in the dreams, he always opened it, and he always woke up before he could see what was inside. Within a year, Rigsby requested a transfer to a different county. He died of a heart attack in 1991 at the age of 38. No history of heart disease. No warning signs, just gone. And the man who led the entry team that morning, Lieutenant Ray Booker, he's the one who finally broke his silence in 2003, 16 years after Daniel Corbin died. He gave an interview to a local journalist who was writing a retrospective on unsolved cases in Appalachian counties. And what Ray Booker said on the record was this: "We didn't find Daniel sitting in that chair. We found him standing behind the door, facing it, like he was trying to keep something out, or keep something in. We moved him to the chair because we didn't want his wife to know. We didn't want anyone to know. But I've thought about it every day since. Because when we moved him, his body was stiff, locked in that position. And his hands weren't just folded. They were pressed against that door, like he'd been pushing. The journalist tried to follow up with the other deputies who were there that day. None of them would corroborate Booker's account. None of them would deny it either. The article was published in a small regional paper and disappeared into obscurity. Ray Booker died in 2006. The official story remained unchanged, but the question lingered, buried under decades of silence. What was Daniel Corbin trying to keep on the other side of that door? To understand what happened to Daniel Corbin, you have to go back, not to 1987, not even to 1952 when Eunice Dalton died in that cabin. You have to go back to 1898, when the property was first deeded to a man named Silas Dalton. Silas was a timber contractor, a man who made his living cutting down the old-growth forests that covered these mountains. He built the cabin with his own hands, raised a family there, and by all accounts lived an unremarkable life. Until the winter of 1911. That's when his wife, Margaret, disappeared. The story told in the county records is simple. She went out to gather firewood one morning and never came back. Search parties combed the woods for weeks. They found nothing. No body, no clothing, no trace. Silas told the authorities that Margaret had been acting strangely in the days before she vanished. She'd stopped speaking to him. She'd stopped sleeping. She would stand at the window for hours, staring out into the trees. He said she told him once, just once, that something was watching the house, something that wanted to come inside, and then she was gone. Silas raised their 3 children alone after that, but neighbors said the cabin changed. They said you could feel it when you got close, a coldness, a weight. People stopped visiting, and in 1929 Silas Dalton was found dead in his bed. Natural causes, they said, but his daughter Eunice, the youngest child, stayed in that cabin. She never left, and when she died in 1952, she died alone in the same room where her father had died, in the same bed. The coroner noted in his report that her body showed signs of severe malnutrition, even though the pantry was fully stocked. He noted that her hands were covered in splinters, like she'd been clawing at something wooden. And he noted, in handwriting that suggests he almost didn't want to include it, that every door and window in the cabin had been nailed shut from the inside. The property was seized by the county for unpaid taxes. It sat empty for 35 years, and then Daniel Corbin walked through that door. Here's what we know happened in those final hours. Daniel Corbin arrived at the cabin at approximately 7 o'clock on the evening of October 11th. His flashlight beam was seen by the hiker who'd made the original report, a man named Gordon Shields, who watched from a distance as Daniel approached the porch. Shields later said the cabin was dark when Daniel arrived. No lights, no candles, nothing. But the moment Daniel stepped onto that porch, Shields said he saw movement in the window, a shadow, passing from one side of the room to the other. And then the door opened. Shields couldn't see who opened it. He couldn't see if anyone was inside, but he saw Daniel hesitate. He saw him stand there in the doorway for a long moment, his flashlight aimed inside, and then Daniel stepped in. The door closed behind him, and the light inside the cabin went out. Shields waited 20 minutes. When Daniel didn't come back out, when no one came out, Shields hiked back down the mountain and drove to the nearest phone to call it in. That was 8:15. By the time deputies arrived, it was after 9, and Daniel had been alone in that cabin for over 2 hours. What happened in those 2 hours, no one knows. But we do know this. When the deputies finally entered 3 days later, they found more than just Daniel's body. They found signs that he'd tried to leave. The inside of the door was scratched. Deep gouges in the wood, some of them still embedded with fragments of his fingernails. The door handle had been torn off from the inside, and on the floor, written in the dust, were words. Not a message, not a plea, just the same 2 words, repeated over and over in frantic, uneven handwriting. It's inside, it's inside, it's inside. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? If this was your family's land, your family's cabin, and you knew what happened there? Would you go inside? Or would you let it stay buried? Because here's the thing no one wants to say out loud. The Hollow Ridge cabin is still there, it's still standing. The county never tore it down. They never sold the land, it just sits there empty waiting. And every few years, someone gets curious. Someone hears the story and decides to see for themselves. Most of them turn back before they reach the porch, but not all of them. In 1994, 2 college students went missing near Hollow Ridge. Their car was found on the access road. In 2001, a real estate appraiser was hired to survey the property for potential development. He never filed his report. He quit his job a week later and left the state. And in 2018, A paranormal investigation team got permission to spend the night in the cabin. They set up cameras, they brought equipment, they live-streamed the first 30 minutes, and then the feed cut out. When authorities arrived the next morning, the team was gone. Their equipment was still there, still running, but every single piece of footage had been erased. They found the team 6 miles away, wandering the woods, incoherent and unresponsive. None of them have spoken publicly about what they saw, but one of them, a woman named Andrea Cole, posted a single sentence on social media 2 months later before deleting her account entirely. She said, "We should never have opened the door. That's the legacy of Hollow Ridge. That's the legacy of Daniel Corbin. A good man who did his job, who walked into the dark because someone had to, and who paid a price no one should ever have to pay. His family never got answers. The county never gave them, and the truth, whatever it is still locked inside that cabin, waiting, watching, breathing. If you believe in places that hold on to darkness, if you believe that some doors should never be opened, then you already know the truth. Daniel Corbin didn't die of natural causes. He died because he saw what was inside, and it saw him back. The Hollow Ridge cabin still stands on that mountain. The door is still there, and somewhere in the cold silence of those empty rooms, something is still waiting for the next person to walk through. The question isn't whether it's real. The question is whether you're brave enough to find out.